Let's ask Annabel Denham. She's here as Deputy Comment Editor from the Telegraph. Annabel, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Hard to imagine Keir Starmer sort of getting worse and worse and worse as the weeks go on, but he's managed it again. He's managed to get to Monday the 4th of August with an even worse reputation than he had last Monday.
Well, it's just quite extraordinary, really, isn't it? And it's reflected in his approval rating, which the last time I looked was around -43. He had one of the quickest falls from grace of any Prime Minister in British history when you look at that polling. And it's no wonder. I mean, every data point economically has gone south since Labour came into power. The cost of living crisis is only intensifying. Growth forecasts have been downgraded. Inflation is sticky. So you've got all of that mess that Rachel Reeves doesn't seem to have a clue how to fix. And then you've got the immigration crisis, which is just gathering steam. Obviously, we had 25,000 people coming across the channel in small boats in record time in 2025. Yvette Cooper, I'm afraid, looks like a rabbit in headlights. They don't seem to have any prescriptions for this issue. And so they are sort of resorting to all kinds of gimmicks. The university example, just the latest of their policies. But ultimately, Mike, we all know now that the only way that we're going to address illegal migration is with a credible deterrent. And that's the one thing that Labour seem unwilling to bring in. And all the while, legal migration figures are still far too high for us to have economic benefits from it or really decent integration of the people who are coming here. You know, the volumes, I'm afraid, the numbers are just simply too high. So I think there's just a growing sense among the British public that Labour has none of the answers to the problems that are facing the country. And that's before you get to this growing distrust between citizens and the authorities as a consequence of this sense that things are being covered up and concealed from them for fear of escalating community tensions.
Yeah, absolutely incredible that. We'll come back to that in a second. Let me just play a little clip that we've got. It's a short clip, this, of a protester who was down at the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf yesterday. And she was asked about Keir Starmer.
And what do you say to Keir Starmer and the Labour government?
Waste. He's ruined this country. Ruined this country. Nobody in England likes Keir Starmer.
And I mean, she does speak for everybody, I think, in Britain now who just thinks Keir Starmer is an embarrassment, because he's now not just an embarrassment at home, he's now an embarrassment abroad. You know, we were speaking earlier in the last hour to a former mayor of Jerusalem. You know, he's basically empowered Hamas because of his ridiculous idea of offering statehood to Palestine without any conditions really seemingly attached to it. And you know, you've now got Hamas putting out horrible propaganda videos of hostages, emaciated hostages, digging their own grave. And they've also basically said that they will not lay down their arms unless and until they're given their own nation, with Jerusalem at its capital.
Well, it was one thing, I think, for Keir Starmer to be a disaster domestically. That much was almost to be expected. This is a man who, before coming into number 10, said that he preferred Davos to Parliament. But he's failing by his own standards, because he seems to consider himself this great international statesman. And yet you had that embarrassing press conference with Donald Trump last week. You then had all the equivocating over Palestinian statehood, only for him to then capitulate to his restless backbenchers. And now we just look so staggeringly naive, Mark. You know, it's just extraordinary, isn't it, that we're giving these cuddly terrorists everything that they want, and they're not behaving as we think that they should be in response. What exactly did this government think was going to happen when we just capitulated to sort of everything that Hamas seemed to want? But ultimately, this terrorist organization wants a one-state solution. It wants an Islamic State which encompasses the entirety of Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. And that's why their slogan is from the river to the sea. So what exactly does Starmer and his acolytes think is going to happen as a consequence of this recognition? This certainly isn't something that can happen overnight anyway, because, you know, where would you set the boundaries? They don't have a democratically elected government who would be, you know, in charge of this supposedly sovereign nation. But none of those questions seem to have been considered, let alone answered, because Starmer's being completely buffeted by events and pushed into announcing these sorts of things because he's under pressure to do so from the left wing of the Labour Party, but also for fear that if they don't kowtow to the Muslim vote, then they'll be under threat in 2029 at the next general election.
Yeah, it's totally naive. And also, which takes us to the front page of your own newspaper, Palestine Action plot to swamp police, because he's also kind of empowered Palestine Action. They've already got a High Court permission, or they've already got permission from the High Court to challenge the government's prescribing of them as a terrorist organisation. Now we learn, thanks to the Telegraph, that thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters are planning to flout terror laws in a coordinated attempt to overwhelm the police. They've hatched a plot to attend a demonstration on Saturday where there'll just be so many of them that the police won't be able to do anything. And we've seen that happen before.
I mean, you just wonder how on earth our criminal justice system has got into such a position that these demonstrators are assuming that if they are high enough in number, then there won't be any punishment, there won't be any consequence to their actions, because we do not have a sufficient number of bobbies on the beat. We do not have, the ability to get people through our justice system and potentially prosecute them as a consequence of their behaviour. So why is it that we haven't had investment here? Why is it that we haven't had the penal reform that we've desperately needed? Why haven't we invested in our prisons estate? It's just one of those cans that's been kicked down the road whilst successive governments have indulged in their pet projects and various luxury beliefs. I mean, I have to say, Mike, it might be an unpopular opinion, I do actually think prescription was arguably overkill. As on other occasions, the saboteurs could have been charged within our existing laws, but we had to have this performative new legislation so that Labour could apparently show that it's tough on the left to offset its attack on the right in the aftermath of Southport. And now we've got the unintended consequences of that, which is a potentially farcical demonstration, which will give the impression that the laws in this country are unenforceable.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree with you. I think whoever comes up with any of the kind of policies that they come out with seems to not ever think through what the likely kind of consequences are going to be. Like, for example, exactly what happened with Hamas now. Did nobody actually have a conversation in Downing Street and think that, what happens if we do this? What happens if we make this international public statement? And what happens if David Lammy goes to the United Nations and starts to quote from Tony Blair, the hand of history on my shoulder and all that cobblers, while getting applause from the anti-Israeli brigade in the United Nations? Did he not think that it might have a knock-on effect, that Hamas might not capitalise on it in the same way that these Palestine Action people, you don't even need to hire an expensive lawyer to say, well, what if we change the name of the organisation and then we won't be prescribed anymore, which is basically what they did.
No, nothing ever seems to really have been thought through. Everything seems to be being done on the spur of the moment. And just to the point on Hamas, that's why I think Reform and the Tories must go in really hard on this. They need to reassure Britain's Jews that Starmer does not speak for the country as a whole. And it sets a dangerous precedent, a dreadful precedent internationally. But I think it does domestically as well. If Labour cannot resist this demand for recognition of Palestinian statehood, Mike, then what's going to happen when there are demands for Sharia law or bans on alcohol in Muslim-majority parts of, say, Bradford or Birmingham? Can we believe that they are going to be able to stand up to, those sorts of interests when they're turning the screws and putting the pressure on? I'm not sure. So again, none of it really seems to speak to an overarching strategy or even sort of, as you said at the beginning, some kind of ideology, set of guiding principles to which this Labour government want to adhere.
Quite. And to go back to your story earlier on about Nuneaton and Warwickshire Police, incredibly, it basically would appear Warwickshire Police's defence for keeping the identities and the nationalities and the ethnicities of two accused rapists who are accused, by the way, of a rape of a 12-year-old girl in Nuneaton. They say they were following national policy in not sharing ethnicity or immigration status. And this is basically the Warwickshire Police telling the council not to reveal any information because it might arouse tensions in the area. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous, isn't it?
It is outrageous, Mike, but I blame the politicians. I blame the government. I have some sympathy with the police, whose ultimate job is to maintain rule and maintain order and to keep the peace. And if, ultimately the government is failing to clamp down on this, if they are housing asylum seekers in hotels at a cost of £5 million a day, if they are not control our borders, have a robust immigration system, then they're putting the police in a very invidious position. Now, I didn't support them, for instance, accompanying far-left protesters to the Migrant Hotel in Epping last week, and you can see why there was a backlash in response to it. But equally, what exactly are they supposed to do? But the wider question is, whether the public deserves to have access to ethnicity data, and of course it does. The Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp was absolutely right in that regard. There was so much evidence in the early 2000s that police and local authorities covered up grooming scandals, which often involve Pakistani gangs, because they were worried about being accused of racism. They were worried about inflaming community tensions, and in so doing, they lost the confidence of the British public. And if we're going to restore that, which is absolutely essential, then people do need access to this. People do expect, in our supposedly functioning democracy, transparency from the authorities.
Yeah, totally. Because at the moment, people are not really in the mood to accept anything that the police say to them. I mean, I was watching that protest down at the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf yesterday, and these women who were behaving perfectly peacefully, wearing pink, doing the conga, and the hokey cokey and all of that, were just defiantly saying to the police, we're not moving. The police were sort of walking through them, saying, you have to get off the road, you have to get off the road. They were sort of shoving them a little bit, and they just said, we're not doing it. We're just not moving. And when you see the police yesterday also issuing, an order to say that nobody can protest outside the hotel for the next 28 days, then having to rescind it because they realised they made a mistake, it's all over the place. It's such a mess.
It is, and I think that it's just an extremely dangerous position that we now find ourselves in. But it's been a long time coming, Mike. I mean, think about some of the actions of the sort of extreme green protesters over the last few years and the way that the police responded to that. There has been this sense that if you are sufficient in number and willing to dig your heels in, then the chances are the police won't be able to do anything about it. And that's because we haven't got enough bodies on the beat. We don't have enough neighbourhood policing. What too many people, sort of squaddies, just sitting in cars waiting for some kind of emergency, or police in the police station trying to monitor how we behave on social media and imposing those non-crime hate incidents and that kind of thing. And it's just such warped priorities. And I think ultimately we've got to get back to having a much stronger police presence on the streets. And, it isn't just protesting, but it's also things like fare dodging and shoplifting, which all of us are seeing on a near daily basis at the moment. There is this sort of overarching sense, whatever the crime data are telling us, it's increasing, that the country is becoming ever more lawless. And I think the only way to correct that is with more of a broken window strategy, where we do have that sort of police presence on the street, and are able to convince people that actions have consequences, that if you break the law, then there will be consequences. Because at the moment, there is this sense that we have all of these laws, but the police are struggling to enforce them.
Yeah, exactly right.